Okay, folks, we're gonna get started. I want to keep up too much time. I actually want to give as much time as I can to Miss Vanessa. But we're glad you guys are here this afternoon to be a part of us as we do a afternoon seminar. And I'm very blessed with the title. And thank you, Vanessa, for putting it together. Healing Together. And I think after the 2 years that we have had, and especially what we as a church have gone through, it's a perfect title to talk about a lot of healing needs to happen within our lives and through not just now, but even past experiences beforehand. So let's have a word of prayer before we get started. Invite the Spirit into this service today for those who are watching at home online. And we'll give the whole floor to Ms. Vanessa to give us a wonderful presentation. With that being said, at the end of the presentation, we will allow to have some Q&A time. And if you do not feel comfortable sharing your question, we'd rather have it written down. I will pass out a piece of paper so you can write it down and later we collect it and she can share. But if you do feel comfortable, just go ahead and ask the question. And right here at the end of the service, okay? So let's bow our head and close our eyes, and let's invite the Lord into this service today. Father God, we thank you so much for today. We thank you for the opportunity of being here to learn how to heal, Father God. And it's so true that right now this world needs a lot of healing with so much pain, so much hurt, so much anger, so much divide, Father God. But I know that when all these things happen, it is you that can unite us together and bring us from a place of hurt to a place of peace and understanding. And so, God, I simply ask that today the presentation presented to us by Vanessa Quintana be just a presentation that brings us closer to you and closer to your word and closer to a life with you every single day. So, God, thank you so much. Thank you for forgiving us our sins and our trespasses, our mistakes. And may today be the start, if we have not done so before, the healing process in our lives to remove those things that are hindering us from relationships with others, but more importantly, our relationship with you. So thank you so much for all that you've done. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Ms. Vanessa, all yours.
Yeah. It's on. All right. We're keeping it on. I know, but sometimes it goes off. All right. And if it does, we have this one, so backup plan. I'm so glad there's a very intimate group here so that if I do, the voice cuts off a little bit, we can all hear each other here. But I didn't mention some of the things that we consider subtle in nature, oftentimes in our society. And I think that it's important for us to mention them because to healing. Let's do this one, Luton. Thank you. Before we go into healing conversations, I think it's important for us to get the whole scope of what we could be talking about when we talk about crises or trauma, so that we don't end up excluding experiences that we've lived that merit attention, that merit reflection. So, for instance, someone who has been parentified as a child, forced to take the place of a parent because of the situations at home, can very much impact the way we behave, the way we react to things in the future. But it's tricky because we almost see that as functional. Right? We say, well, that's just the way we grew up. That's what we had to do in our family. That's what my role was in the family, and that's fine. That's what I had to do. I'm not blaming my parents. I'm not going to, go out and cast blame on anything else. No, we're not talking about who's wrong or who's right. And oftentimes, at least in my culture, it's it's not okay to point the finger at anyone because everyone was trying to survive together. And so when we go back into our stories of trauma, oftentimes we invalidate our experiences because we think that we have to blame somebody else before we can acknowledge what happened to us. And let's separate that from ourselves a bit. I think that's very important when we talk about healing and trauma, that we separate blame, that we separate maybe even rationalization or justification, and just sit a while with what happened, purely just what happened. And being parentified, for instance, is something that deeply impacts the lives of human beings, of children going forward. So that's one of them that I think that I see very often in my practice, and I see very often impacts the mental health of adults and adult relationships, is being parentified. And what do I mean by being parentified? I think I might have explained it just a little bit, but it's a child who, in the absence of a caregiver, was forced to take the role of a caregiver, maybe taking care of siblings, or being in charge of cooking for everybody, or being in charge of finances, or hearing another parent talk about the caregiver, supporting a parent, a dad or a mom in that role instead of the role of a child. The subsystem, considered the children and siblings system, is so important to protect. As parents, the parents in the marital system hold a position of a lot of power. Power that we learn to manage as we grow older, because we know experiences, because we go through school, or because we have jobs, or because our skills gradually evolve to be able to manage all that power that comes with adulting. However, children, when they're forced to hold and manage that power, it is extremely overwhelming. That they can doesn't mean that they should, or that they can do it well. And so in that, I hear a lot of trauma stories out in our community of teenagers who had to care for younger siblings, or who had to play these powerful roles in their family systems. And remember, we're not assigning blame. It is what it is, and that happened. But when we reflect on how I behave on certain things, we can begin to have these aha moments. That's why I do that. That's why I react to that the way I react. Got it. And now we know what to work on in ourselves to move forward and heal, especially in our relationships, with the way we parent our kids, or parent the kids around us. I'm not saying our biological children are the only ones we parent. We parent a lot of people around us, especially in collectivist cultures such as my own. Negligence is another one, being neglected, and I'm not talking about the abuse category of negligence where you're not given basic needs, you're starving, you're maybe in a place where you don't have freedom. I'm talking a little bit more about those subtle negligences, whether it's emotional negligence, nobody taught you how to express your emotions, or at home, emotions where it's not allowed to be talked about. And there was no freedom, maybe, or there was a lot of shame in expressing that you were sad or that you were crying. And those social messages of, why are you crying? It's not even that bad. Boys are not allowed to cry. That's a very typical one, for instance. Or not being able to receive comfort from a caregiver. Being in a place where you're very overwhelmed, you're very afraid, and you are not comfortable or safe to reach out to somebody. Even if they might have been, great parents, the fact that there was something holding you back, and that in itself you weren't able to communicate things with your parents emotionally, that can impact our system too. So negligence in that way, or negligence in the way that there was nobody around. We call that latchkey. I always get it wrong. Latchkey kids, for instance, both parents needed to work. It's just the way we have to function in our society oftentimes, because then what happens, right? We fall apart. Blame aside, in itself, that impacts the child in a very permanent way. So that type of just absence of family and caregivers. Maybe critical or manipulative messages from caregivers or people in positions of authority. That is also trauma with a lowercase t. In families that I've been around, for instance, closer types of family systems, I hear the message a lot about beauty and weight with women, and I've noticed the effects of that on adult relationships or on our adult identities, the way we manage sexual relationships in our adult life, or the way we our decisions in our relationship with food or our relationship with shopping or clothes, for instance. We are impacted emotionally by these messages. We internalize the messages, and that dictates our behavior further on. That constitutes trauma. And a lot of people say, well, I've never been assaulted, or I've never gone through these experiences. But when I mention examples of lower T traumas, people are like, whoa, really? Okay, now I can put the dots together and understand why I do certain things, or why I'm stuck in certain places in my relationships. Other things are being controlled by someone else or coerced to do things against your will. And that coercion can be very subtle in nature, such as, if you don't do this, I'm going to tell the kids that you're the bad parent. That's something that might sound not so bad, but at the end of the day, it turns out to be something that moves you to behave in a different way. And that type of control over you, over your emotions, over your behavior, that manipulation, for instance, by somebody else, changes you. It changes you. And we don't know sometimes what we carry from those moments until it's too late sometimes. We explode, or we've had enough, and we dissociate, or suddenly now we're struggling with a mental illness. How did I get here? How did I get to feeling like I've been depressed for 2 years? Like, well, I don't know that it's just one thing. Maybe it's all of these things put together, these messages, these behaviors, these coercions, and it can be quite complicated. If you can imagine in therapy, it's also quite complicated to unravel and work through. Other things, being in high-risk professions. High-risk professions, what are those? Professions that are in close contact with traumatic experiences. The nursing profession, I was talking to Marilyn about things that she's seen in the ER, for instance. The medical professions, therapists, psychiatrists, teachers oftentimes are a high-risk profession because of the abuse that they have to put themselves between to advocate for their kids, or what they witness, or what they go through, just the systemic sort of environments that some of these professions hold. That can also cause a huge impact to our emotional system. Vicarious trauma. I think that it's a misperception that the trauma really has to do with what I went through, but oftentimes it's trauma that someone else has gone through that I'm in close contact with. The trauma stories of other people can end up impacting me in a way that I show symptoms. And that can lead to burnout. Now we know what burnout is, right? Everybody in society raises their hand. Burnout is a real issue with us right now. And sometimes we think, I've heard this story so much, I don't think I care anymore. Vicarious trauma does that to us. It desensitizes us, and it goes through a moment or a phase of self-protection to stop hurting with other people. With people such as myself, and I am an acclaimed and self-identified, highly empathic person, to the point where I can watch someone go through something and I can perceive their emotions. that they're going through. And it impacts me unless I put a barrier, right? Thank goodness for the profession to teach us to put boundaries on those sorts of things. But for individuals who aren't able to put those boundaries, that trauma that someone else is living, that someone else is talking about, can definitely impact me emotionally. Other things, personal addiction or the addiction of a loved one. I've heard stories of parents that battle their child's addiction or their partner's addictions, and it causes such a permanent change in the family structure and in their health and in the system that, yes, definitely it's considered lower T trauma, sometimes capital T trauma, depending on what those issues are. Living with or taking care of someone with untreated or mismanaged mental illness. So, for instance, the diagnoses that I think are more typical to consider in these cases are schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, chronic depression. Chronic depression is something that I think people underestimate. When we look at health conditions and mental health conditions, physical health and mental health conditions, I think we end up thinking that the physical health conditions are more debilitating. And I was teaching and training first aid mental health for a long time. And in one of the studies that was done, I think public health got together with a lot of other professions. They researched the impact of illnesses on our ability to function. And they categorized major depression as one of the most disabling illnesses there are. Even more so than epilepsy, cancers, and things like that. Yeah, so when we live with someone with mismanaged or mistreated or untreated or that's treated not in the right way, mental illness, we are impacted. Or when we are living through those things, we are definitely impacted in a very traumatic, permanent way. And then bullying. I think that we think of kids when we talk about bullying oftentimes. But what about the relational bullying that we go through as well? I keep reverting back to my culture because that's what I know, but I've also studied other cultures, especially collectivist culture, and we call that carrilla in Spanish, where it's like this sort of hazing with each other that's appropriate / expected / wrong all at the same time. And we normalize it. Oh, don't worry, they're just kidding. Oh, this boy is treating you bad, it's because he likes you. All of these messages that we send out to our kids or that we try to toughen up to try to survive because that's just the way that our schools are, our society is, or the family itself is. Oh, they're gonna toughen up. We need to toughen that kid up because he cries too much or she cries too much. All of those things end up having permanent impact in our emotional systems and thus, what I live to talk about, are relational systems, our relationships with others, our adult relationships. So those I wanted to mention just as a prelude into going into the healing conversations, because I don't want you to think, oh, I'm not included in this conversation. You are. You are. Whether you've lived it or you're exposed to it or someone in your family has trauma, we all need to engage in healthier and healing conversations with each other. Maybe at some point you feel out of this topic a little bit, but let me tell you, there's going to be one moment. I can assure it. There's going to be one moment where you're going to be faced with a situation and someone's telling you something that was traumatic to them. And these sorts of skills that we can engage in with healing conversations, I think make a huge difference in the way we approach other people and we approach ourselves with compassion. Oof, that's the harder piece, by the way. All right, so we did mention that we can answer questions, by the way, so if you have any questions going into this or throughout it, write them down, remember them, so that at the end we can make this a little bit more tailored to each other. Good. I needed to include this right off the bat. And we go through a healing journey. Some people think that healing is like, okay, I'm going to go into therapy and then I'm healed, like a car wash. What we all know about cars, especially those of you who have had little ones, is that they're never clean. And that's why we have to keep coming back. We have to keep coming back into healing, and recovery is a long life process. Okay? So the sooner we can accept that we're never done healing, the sooner we can start approaching this with compassion or with resilience or with strength, just inner strength, knowing that I'm not going to be frustrated with myself because I showed another symptom or because I was triggered again. I've been working on this. I've been going and I've been paying money in therapy and I'm triggered again. I thought I was done with this. We're never done with it, but we are more resilient as time goes by and as we become more intentional about our healing process. Let me tell you, emotions are not absorbed. You think that what you live through, you're done because you never mentioned it, because it's over. No, emotions are transformed. You thought you didn't have to deal with it again because you shoved it under the mat, and now you're dealing with joint pain, and you think it has nothing to do one thing with another. It does. When we do not heed our emotional system's red flags and cries for help, guess what happens? It's transformed into cries for help in our bodies. Our bodies are saying, you're going to pay attention somehow. Ahí te voy. You're going to listen. And ironically, we do listen more to our bodies than our emotional systems. We could be crying every day, screaming at our loved ones. We could be breaking down or shopping compulsively. But oh my goodness, when I get migraines, I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? Let's take a couple steps back. So in the recovery process, we understand that we're never completely done, but there are some things throughout it that we do need to consider in order to heal well. So here are some things. I love this infographic. So a cycle of self-love, self-doubt, and self-criticism are normal. We come back to these things. I thought I was done. I thought I was healed, for instance. And we walk back to, okay, be patient, Vanessa. This is a process. Learning and unlearning. I have to unlearn how to talk to my loved ones. I was taught to like this, but it doesn't mean I want to keep talking to my loved ones like this. So what do I got to do? I can buy a book, I can look at a seminar, I can go on a training, I can go to therapy. There's so many things. But that also means that I have to have it super conscious, because I'm going to be in that moment where I'm so frustrated, where I'm so angry, and what's going to happen? Right? I revert back and I'm like, oh, that's where I need to apply all these things. That's the unlearning and learning back up again. And it's going to take me 10 tries, and then it's going to take me 7, and then it's going to take me 5, and then I'm going to go back a couple of steps, and then I'm going to be like, I got this. It's that process. Feeling frustrated, making mistakes, feeling overwhelmed, struggling to accept the truth about circumstances. That's a difficult one, because we're oftentimes blinded by our trauma and our trauma responses, and we start rationalizing everything. And rationalization is a self-defense mechanism where we give explanations to the things that we're going through. For instance, oh yeah, I'm feeling really ill today, but it's probably just because I was out a little bit and in the weather and I got overexposed. That's rationalization, and it keeps me from taking responsibility. For instance, another one that could be more emotionally based. I was screaming at everyone, but because I was stressed, or because everyone was being really upset that day and we hadn't eaten. Really? Or because you have these bad communication habits. Either one. So in these cases of Accepting the truth about circumstances comes with accepting your responsibility in the change that you need to do. Another one is accepting reality. What can you and what can't you do? Setting boundaries, for instance, and looking at your limitations and then going out to get help to fulfill the areas, right? The gaps that we have. Needing help, grieving. I talked about that this morning. Taking responsibility that I will never stop talking about. We all need to do more of that. Struggling to forgive self. That's a big one. We can forgive others because it's in the Bible. But what does the Bible say about forgiving yourself? That's a little bit more difficult. It's a little bit more difficult. Feeling guilty, shame, I would add there. Shame has a lot to do with why we don't heal and recover. Being discouraged, feeling lost, losing relationships. Because I'm setting boundaries, I'm also losing relationships sometimes. Toxic relationships. Giving up, recreating yourself. What an impactful word. I like thinking that we are all made by God to be creators. We're made in his image, yes? And what is he? If not the most amazing creator ever. I was going to say in the world, ever. He is a creator made in his image. We can recreate ourselves. Areas we don't like, we recreate it. We learn to do something new with what we have. And oftentimes that includes our identity. Because I thought maybe my weight was tied with my identity. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is how I look. And I decided to not give in to those messages, to not give in to the discouragement, to not give in to the pain, for instance. And I'm changing the way my brain works, and I'm changing my eating habits, and I'm changing my emotional habits. And I'm coming to the point where I'm like, oh, I'm neither here nor here. I'm here. And there's peace with my new identity, with my weight, with my communication habits, with my spending habits, with my spirituality. This is who I am now. That's okay. That's okay. Just because you've always done these things doesn't mean you continue doing these things if they're dysfunctional. Finding it hard to be selfish. This is a big word for our society, yes? Yeah? What do you mean you're going to do this on your own? Now, how selfish? You're going to spend money on you? Self-care, isn't that selfish? I decided to take a week vacation next week. I call it vacation, but it's really not vacation because I do have to do some things. But it is a vacation in a lot of ways because I am giving myself a retreat to recover from years of not being completely myself and not belonging completely to myself. Motherhood, wifehood, workhood, all of those things that chip at us and exhaust us maybe, that take from us. I'm not saying those things are bad. Remember, we're going back to those places where you're just like, that's just the way it is. That's how life is. Right now, it's super intense, by the way. A 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old with 3 jobs, all stay at home. I'm a stay-at-home mom doing homeschooling, and I have a whole farm of animals to take care of, and chickens that give me 7 eggs every day that I have to find out what to do with. All these things going on, and a horse, and all these things. And I'm exhausted. It's so intense. I'm so exhausted. I love teaching. I love doing therapy. They energize me, yes. But am I seeing a wear out? Remember, looking at the truth about circumstances, that I admit to being worn out doesn't mean I'm weak. Ooh. That I'm asking for help doesn't mean I'm incapable. So I decided to take a retreat next week. Yeah. And for a little while, I was like, you know what? My husband let me take this retreat. And I was just like, let's stop. He didn't give me permission to take a retreat because I wasn't really asking for permission. But he was on board because we collaborate with each other and we're a good team. So I have to stop justifying socially as a mom taking a break because what? Moms don't take a break. That means they're not good moms, you know? I had to stop those messages that I was carrying, and I had to say, if I'm fresh and I am recovered and I am re-energized, I can come back to my world and I can do it better for the next 10 years. Ideal thinking that 1 week will do all of that, but I'm thinking if it gets me to 1 year, we could reset and do this again. At the end of the day, though, this is super important to set aside those messages of being selfish and reframe it as smart, as long-term, this is what's best for me and my kids, because literally I'm putting on my oxygen mask for this week. And we all know that analogy, right? Putting on your oxygen mask first. Finding it hard to be selfish, struggling to fit in. So these are things that are normal to go through and expect in our journey of recovery. Specifically, though, how do we heal our brain? I don't like talking about something to not follow it up with like a practical application. I talked a lot about healing in the morning and recovery and how important it was to cleave to God and His safety. And I think that's the first step. You recognize that you've gone through something and that it impacts you. And that's called a contemplative state. Before contemplative is pre-contemplative. No question there, no surprise. And when you're in pre-contemplative mode, you're like, I don't have a problem. I hear a lot of this when we talk about corporal punishment in the families. And I hear things like, well, I got spanked and I'm fine. I got beat up a couple of times and I'm no worse for wear. I hear that a lot. No joke. I hear that a lot. And I'm very respectful because there's a cultural feature to that and all. But sometimes I really want to say, are you? Are you? Are we? Long term, though, what did it really help with? Yeah. Right. That's called rationalization again. I am justifying what happened to me without recognizing that there could have been other options to achieve the same purpose or a better purpose. So all that aside, not blaming anybody, right? Coming into the point where we are wanting to heal our brains, we are wanting to come to a place of doing better for ourselves, it's the recognition. I refuse to deny the impact of my early childhood experiences or my traumatic experiences. And now I'm in contemplation. That's a big step. For a lot of people, that's a life-changing step. Okay, so now I'm aware that there's an impact to myself. Biggest question, what do I do now? A lot of people stay here a long time. And when you fester, when you stay there a long time and you get stuck, it starts sounding like, yeah, but that was because of this other person's problem. Or you know what? I have this and I lived through it, so what? This is how I am. I'm super critical because I can just tell you your mistakes. You got to deal with it. I'm a super straightforward person, okay? This is how I talk. So it's almost like this self-justification for your bad habits or bad relational habits. Or the bad things you say. Exactly. Oh, I do this? It's cultural. Or just because I didn't know any better. And it's just what I do. I did that. Fine, whatever. I'm not going to ask forgiveness about it. That's just what I did. You got to accept. Because you're stuck. You realize there was something there, but there wasn't enough information to push you into the next step of recovery called preparing for action. And that's where a lot of us are right now, today, at this moment, as we're hearing this. We're starting to, oh, wow. And now, what I want to offer is, in preparing for action, what to do, how to do these sorts of things. The rest, by the way, it's up to you, God, and your professionals, and your family around you. Not that I won't support you, absolutely reach out to me. But it really is the action phase is your responsibility. And from there goes maintenance, maintaining all of that. And that's why recovery is a lifelong process. And guess what? There's another one called relapse, where I get triggered by something and I'm back over here in one of these other stages. So, how to heal our brain. Let's start there because it's the most important part. I talked about the impact of the brain and how it's permanently changed with the traumatic experiences that we've gone through, and sometimes we can feel like it's out of our control. How do we heal our brain? What do we do? Drink more water? How do we heal our brain? This is such a hard concept to go through. Well, let's talk about what the research shows heals our brain. Number one, self-reflection. Recognizing the impact of these things starts healing our brain. Remember, I'm talking about research here. This is brain research from scientific research. You don't believe a therapist who's in love with relationships, you gotta believe science, right? Self-reflection is super important. How do we engage in self-reflection, or what is self-reflection? Starting with exploring and recognizing your feelings. Let's think back to that traumatic experience, whether that be lowercase or uppercase. What did you feel in that moment? I know this is a typical therapist question, right? In the media, it's like, what do you feel? It's like that thing that therapists are supposed to always ask about. Well, we ask about it because you've never thought about it, and we got to start doing that work. Why do we have to recognize our feelings? Why is that so important to people? Can we just stop talking about feelings already? Because our feelings are, in fact, neurochemical reactions, or hormones. We're not in control of our feelings. Our feelings happen to us, right? Amygdala, hormones, the gut, all of it. It's what causes us to feel certain things. They're associated with experiences, with memories, etc. We can't control how we feel. So when we recognize and explore these feelings through self-awareness, we begin to understand why we're reacting in this way. I'll give you an example. When I had my daughter, I remember struggling a lot with the stage before she walked, or with my 3 kids. The stage before they were walking was really hard for me. Breastfeeding, carrying them all the time, going over to where they were, having them engage in play, for instance, all of it was very overwhelming for me. And I noticed that internally, if not behaviorally, like I just noticed I was really tired really fast. And not because of the sleepless nights so much as I noticed emotionally, I was like, in those moments of being overwhelmed and just like, I don't want to do all of these things, and struggling. And as I was contemplating, because I have periods of saying, wait, what is going on? Why am I feeling this way? Why am I thinking this way? And in one of those moments, I remember talking it over with my husband. He's my sounding board. Great looking sounding board, by the way. And I was talking to him about this, and I'm like, why am I struggling with this, etc. And he said something. Of course he said something. He said, does that have anything to do with maybe your mom struggling at that moment of your life as well? I was like, whoa, yeah, you got something there. We started talking it through, and I started realizing that I had heard a lot of stories growing up where I cried a lot when I was young, when I was a baby. And my mom had a really hard time. That was very triggering for her. She had a really hard time kind of coping with my emotional reactions to things. I mentioned I was highly empathic. Like, I don't know, I could be set off crying by a lot of things when I was younger, maybe. And for her, it was too much because she was an independent woman. She's like a strong, independent woman with a lot of messages of like, capability and power and independence. And I think that I was too dependent in a moment where her messages are like she needed to strive and build her businesses, etc. And so I would naturally go over and be handed over to my dad. And my dad would, comfort me, and I remember so many beautiful moments when my dad would say things like, "You're feeling grumpy," and I'm just like, "I am," and he's like, "It's fine, you're my Eeyore, no problem, you can feel as grumpy as you want, you can feel as sad as you want," and I'd be like, "Oh," and he would hug me and hold me, and it was done. Like, I felt like it resolved really quickly. It's called problem dissolving, when you talk through something and it just kind of just settles, problem dissolving. And now I'm an adult and I have my kids, and I thought I worked through this. I took therapy. My goodness, I went through thousands of dollars of student loans for therapy. Like, I went through the program. Like, what else and now I'm here and I'm with my kids and I'm being triggered by something I had no idea I was still carrying. In fact, I don't think I would have ever known what it would have been like, because I had never been a mom of a dependent child, just in the moment where I had received a message unconsciously of rejection from my early childhood. In that moment, there was an aha. There's an awareness now, and now I know that whenever my kids are feeling overly dependent because they're sick, for instance, or because they're hurt in some way, I know that I struggle through those things and I have to relearn how to feel and think about them. So I explored my emotions, I recognized my feelings in order to have control of what I would do now that I know. Understanding and recognizing physical sensations. All of these things are combined. Remember, body and mind are connected, exactly. Incredibly and intricately connected, and I just praise God for that, because if sometimes I don't hear the alarm systems emotionally, I hear them or feel them physically, or vice versa. And so we understand and recognize our physical sensations to be able to catch our attention from what we're missing emotionally. More consciousness equals more control. The more I become aware of what I'm feeling, of what I'm going through, or how it's impacted me, and I talk about responsibility, right? The more in control I can be of my emotional system. That's called emotional regulation. And when I can regulate my emotions, because now I understand what I'm going through, I'm having more compassion on myself, then is opportunity to grow our emotional intelligence. Because I know myself, I understand my emotions, and I can interact with others better. Emotional intelligence grows. And thus, our control of ourselves and of others. I'm not talking about control like you have to control somebody else. A lot of people think that when you understand your emotions, you can manipulate others better. Nah, that's a diagnosis for sure. But in this case, we're talking more about self-control, and thus better self-control in our relationships with others. We wonder sometimes why we just, are angry at certain things, or we yell at certain things. Walk yourself back and start the process from the very beginning, exploring understanding if you want more control of those emotions that you feel are mismanaged. We re-educate our brain to tolerate physical sensations and enjoy physical touch. Oftentimes people who have been through abusive relationships or rape or assault find it very hard to be touched or to receive touch well. They crave touch, but at the same time, it's very repulsive and uncomfortable. So there's people who struggle a lot with sexual relationships, and that's the more, I think, typical response of a rape, for instance, or an abuse. But we also forget about the other situations where we're just hypersensitive to certain touches or certain behaviors of other people, or smells, or things, sensations in our environment. We're hypersensitive to that. And we could say things like, you know what? I just cannot have something against my skin that feels like this. That's not coincidence. You're not born feeling an aversion to felt, That comes from somewhere. That's a memory that's being triggered by something, and your body is trying to avoid it. Physical touch is the same way. Sometimes we're like, oh, can you just get away from me? I just need to be alone. Da, 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 da. You're reacting to an overwhelmed feeling, a message of this is too much. And so we have to retrain our brain to tolerate physical sensation. Slowly but surely, it can be done to the point where maybe a rape victim can enjoy a healthy sexual relationship with a safe partner. It can be done, there's hope there. As well as a parent, for instance, that can tolerate the touch and kisses of a child after being severely physically abused by their own parents, etc. You can connect with yourself, you must connect with yourself, and engage in coping skills and self-care. I talked about self-care earlier and how important it was to our emotional system to re-energize, but coping skills are important too. What are coping skills? You thought you weren't going to get to talk today, and then I wasn't going to ask questions. What are coping skills or coping mechanisms? That's an example. But what about the definition? Coping skills are the way we confront or manage our problems, our situations, the things that stress us. How do we do that? How do we go about that? So let's just say we lose our jobs. How would each of you manage losing your jobs, both emotionally and behaviorally? What would you feel if you lost your job? And what would you do if you lost your job? And I'm not talking about just one end of the spectrum. Some of you would be like, oh, finally. I was waiting for this moment to happen. I get an excuse to get compensated for all my years of trauma. Go ahead.
I'm actually in the process of exiting the department because it's closing down.
Mm-hmm.
So we're dealing with the daily emotional countdown
Uh-huh.
to closure.
Wow.
And it's getting harder every day.
Yeah.
So we're having to comfort each other, but I think everyone had dealt with the fact that it's closing, but you didn't know as you got closer to the days that emotionally the emotions are going higher.
Yeah.
And it's getting harder to just show up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the workload is minimizing, so your value or what you're used to becomes less.
Yeah.
And then you start questioning, is it because I didn't perform well?
Mm-hmm.
You start pointing finger at
Blame.
yourself.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with anyone. You're just a collateral
Yeah.
damage of something else.
Wow.
So emotionally, I'm thankful that my faith and my relationship has given me the strength to be able to comfort
Mm-hmm.
my boss and my coworkers,
Mm-hmm.
and just every day, just take it one day at a time,
Mm-hmm.
and just make that the best day possible.
Right.
Forget, we know the inevitable, but in that moment, coping with that one day is as far as ahead as you can see.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that sometimes coping has to just, what do I need to do today, right now,
Mm-hmm.
to make things
Manageable.
manageable.
Yeah. Surviving. Like the least I can do to just go through this. So the example is your company is closing, and you have to manage the feelings and the coworkers' feelings over your company is just inevitably closing. And that's a type of grief and loss that we go through. And it's I teach this to my students. I hope none of them ever watch this. It's like Dr. Q, you forgot the concept name. Oops. It's predetermined or some sort of name like that. When we anticipated grief, sorry. So we're anticipating loss of something, and we're going through this emotional process like as if we lost something. That's such a hard place to be. And so yes, we have to employ coping. And some people cope by saying, I'm not going to think about it until I get there. It might be functional for a little bit. When you do get there, though, that might be a little bit more explosive because you didn't manage it in the transition that I think was healthy to do so. So that's a great example. Thank you. And we go through healthy coping mechanisms and unhealthy coping mechanisms. And in that way, we can consider maybe addiction or drinking as unhealthy, or things like denial or high conflict, or shopping compulsively just to kind of forget this and get another good feeling somewhere else, or healthy coping mechanisms, which is like, I gotta look for a job, I'm gonna talk this out with my family, what am I gonna do next, create an action plan, or relieve stress, go exercise, take deep breaths when this is going on at work. What am I going to do different? How can I reframe my thought process, like you were mentioning? All of those things are considered healthy coping mechanisms. Our experience of our trauma and of our stress is very much determined by our coping mechanisms, how we manage those things and how we think about those things, our perceptions. So being optimistic, you gave a really good one on that's a cognitive coping skill. Being optimistic really changes the course of how you live through things. Resilience is based on how I think about my experience and how I process my experience and how I see my future, my hope, the hope that I'm holding on to as part of my next steps, for instance. So yeah, that's extremely important, engaging in those healthy coping skills. Maintaining focus and inner calm when we are triggered. So let's just say you're in that moment where you are experiencing post-traumatic stress symptoms, and your heart's beating super fast, you are sweating, you're going into a panic attack, for instance, if you've had a car accident and you feel yourself triggered when things happen on the road, or you don't want to drive anymore because of situations like this. Anyway, you're in that moment, you're feeling triggered by something, and all of your body is just woo, 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 going off on the alarm signals. I want you to remember that when that happens, our survival brain, our automatic functions are turned on, which means our frontal lobe is shut off. And what happens in our frontal lobe? Rational thinking, decision-making, management, regulation of our emotions, all of that is our frontal lobe. So we treat ourselves too harshly when we say, okay, next time I'm here, I'm just gonna do this. Or why didn't I do that? I should have just, I think about a car accident that I've had, I should have just done this to the steering wheel or done this to I can't. I literally cannot do that if I'm going through something I've never faced before because my frontal lobe is not on. My primitive brain and my automatic reactions are on. So in that way, I think it's super important for us to understand that going through these triggers is in itself sort of like a re-traumatization if we do not understand what to do in those moments. I tell my students or participants when we're going through trainings of how to manage panic attacks with other people or suicidal behavior, I tell them oftentimes it really helps someone to hear, this is a panic attack. Just to call it by its name. This is what you're going through. You're not dying, you're not having a heart attack because the symptoms are so similar, and you're not out of control, you're not, I hate the word crazy, but a lot of people use it. I'm not going crazy, for instance. This is a panic attack. It's gonna be over in 5 minutes. Take a deep breath, get some cool water, touch something cold, have a different sensation, talk about what you're seeing, what you're feeling, to be able to stop and interrupt the function of your automatic brain. And you can interrupt that signal and that out of control signals by starting to engage your frontal lobe. And so asking questions of a person, they might not be answering them quite right, but asking questions and even answering them yourself might have them start to get out of the trigger or the trigger response. So focus and try to practice inner calm. What gets you inner calm? I remember giving birth to my kids, and how can I forget, right? And my daughter specifically, I decided to go through natural birth, and I was just keeping my cool and going through the contractions like a warrior, and I was so proud of myself. It was hurting so much. I was just like, get through the next one, get through the next one. And my sister, who knows me so well, she comes up to me and she says, this is really hard, huh? They'd never seen me like this before. I was just absolute silence. I didn't want to talk to anybody. If someone would say something, I'd just be like, nothing. I'm usually pretty talkative through things. And so she's like, this is hard, huh? I'm like, you think? And I was like, oh. And she's like, what can I do? if I hadn't known what I needed, I don't think I could have helped her help me. But I knew, because I'd thought about it before, that I thought I didn't want to turn on a distraction like the TV, for instance. I didn't want to do that. And I told her, I just need to turn the lights off. And she's like, got it, lights off. Hey, lights, 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 everybody. She's just a perfect taskmaster. And all the nurses just, and like everybody out of the room who doesn't need to be here. I'm just like, thank you. So less sound, less stimulation, etc. And she's like, what else? And I told her, can you have him stop doing that? Because my husband was like rubbing my arm or something. And I was just like, that doesn't help. This, I don't know, friction feels weird or whatever. And she's like, okay, got it. And because I know I didn't want to yell at people, you know, kind of lose my cool. Are you kidding? A therapist losing their cool, and you know, you got to preach what I do what I preach. No, just kidding. And so I told her, I need something cold. And I knew from previous panic attacks that cold helps me. Having something cold interrupts my automatic functions and my automatic responses. So I need something cold. She's like, got it. So she went, get some ice, put the paper, the cloth in water, in cold water, and she comes over, and that's what she did for the next 3 hours. I think that happened. So much better, so much better. Automatically, I felt myself being able to tolerate it better. I could feel it, like the difference was night and day. It was amazing for me to learn that about myself. I would not have been able to do that if all I was worried about was reacting to the moment, though. Being a momzilla, you know, just being like, rah this and rah that and rah that. Like, I needed that space to be able to engage and process and give a response that would be helpful. And that experience is something we all remember. My sister and I get to talk about it with my husband, and it's in the pictures. Like, in that moment, like, I was so proud of myself for going through that. I didn't compare to myself to other women, but I was proud of myself for being able to have an experience that I can turn back to and not be ashamed of. So imagine your triggers don't become something shameful that you carry, but becomes opportunities for self-growth and self-awareness and self-compassion. You're completely present, you're engaged, like I mentioned, and you take baby steps. It wasn't like I just got to the birthing room and I was like, let's do this, right? I went through classes of birthing classes, and someone told me that you can tolerate ice on your hand for the first minute or whatever, all these things. But I decided, I'm going to engage in it. For some of you, it's therapy. For some of you, it's exercise. For some of you, it's healthy eating. What are your baby steps? What is your process, your goals, and how are you going to break those up into things that make it easier for you to celebrate your victories rather than, kind of recriminate yourself for the failures or to point out the failures in what you're doing, which is why baby steps are so important. And take action. Do it. Do it. Just get into the action plan and start making change today. By the way, for those of you who came, you guys have a bigger responsibility than those who didn't, because now you know. And so taking action feels different when we have the information to do something different about that. And I love hearing stories where I hear people say, I've already gone through therapy. And that hasn't, completely helped. Or I've done this and that hasn't. Or I did this and that did. Great, let's keep searching for solutions. Let's keep talking to people. Let's keep exploring. Let's keep trying. There's hope when we keep trying. And we're stopping the cycles. I hear sometimes family systems engage in the same cycles. In my culture, that's very, very common to hear. So we have instances of sexual abuse, and we're communicating the sexual abuse to our people in power, our caregivers, and our caregivers are telling us, like, that didn't happen, or, if that's nothing compared to what I went through, and all of these things. And so the cycles are repeated, the conflictual cycles in our relationships, or the addictions in our family patterns, or generational patterns, and they just keep going and going and going. We're not giving blame to anything. We're just realizing that there's a thing missing here, and that's we can't stop the cycles if I don't ask myself, what's my responsibility? How can I make a difference, starting with myself, towards my future, towards the next systems that are created after me? We heal together. How do we heal together? By setting boundaries. Sometimes it's healing together by saying, you know what, I can't do that this time, but I can definitely do that next time. There's this great book by William Ury called The Power of a Positive No. What a beautiful way to set boundaries with maintaining healthy relationships while also establishing our limits. Because sometimes we think that if we say no, what's going to happen? The apocalypse, right? What else? People are going to see us different or like incapable or weak. Or they're not going to ask us again and they're going to reject us. Or that we're going to be seen as weak. Whatever it is that we have in our messages or structures, the stories, I want to say, the stories that we tell ourselves of why we can't set boundaries are very impactful. So we have to learn to set boundaries to be able to heal together. Sometimes saying no to you makes it so that we have a better relationship. And this is a bit controversial because we think that the closer we are, the healthier we are. Sometimes distance is necessary to coexist. There's a truth in the Bible about, someone shall leave their parents and then cleave to their partner. There's a process there established. We create distance in order to have healthy relationships if we want to engage in them later on. And I think that principle holds true with some of our family members, yes? No? Just me? The boundaries that we hold sometimes are, hey, we can't work together. We can't have a business together. We want to have a healthy relationship. This isn't going to work. Or in order to have a healthy relationship, maybe we need to text and call each other less. Or live in a different state. For some people, it's country. I'm not talking about cutting off a family member. Creating separation because you're willing to engage with them in a better way. The hope is we can have a better relationship if this happens. I am no longer going to try to change you because that hurts us. And I'm not going to engage in a relationship where you're constantly trying to change me. How could I love you and accept you and respect you? That's where your list comes out. For some, that's what the boundaries are. I'm talking about distance, but it could be anything. It could be changing your language. It could be changing your communication style. It could be going to therapy together. Or it could be distance, whichever. Engaging in positive and safe experiences with others. So fostering those moments where we're having positive experiences, optimistic feelings towards each other. Changing the stories we hold of the world and others. I remember having a colleague, I was telling her something and she looks at me, she's like, oh. It's very intimidating when a colleague does that, a fellow therapist. Oh, so that's the story you tell yourself. Ouch. And I realized it was a story I was telling myself, but it wasn't completely true in all of its context. It wasn't really true. It was just something I told myself, that's why I did what I did. And when I started to question the stories I told myself, like being incapable or unworthy or Or, women shouldn't preach. That was a big one to go through. And I was being invited to speak at different places, and the moment of the sermon, right, that space, it's like, this is how women should do things, or women shouldn't do things in our culture, our religious culture, our ethnic culture. There's a lot of messages about, the roles, etc. So the stories that I was telling myself impacted a lot on my boundaries. So I was saying yes to a lot of speaking engagements I should have said no to, because this is who I am. So now when people call me and say, hey, can you come to our church? Yes, what are the needs of your church? Oh, the needs are, we're facing a lot of depression, we're facing a lot of anxiety, we're facing a lot of family conflict or divorce. Definitely, I can help. These are my expectations. These are the expectations of you towards me. But instead of accepting everything that I got, especially ones that's like, oh, pastor's not in, can you come and preach? It'd be like, my area of my forte is mental health. I would love to speak to your church about mental health. These are the topics that I have available. That made it so that I was interacting more positively with my communities, but I was also changing the stories I had about myself. I wasn't incapable of talking spiritually with others. I wasn't comfortable because that's not my scope of work. But that also was something that was keeping me from exploring my spirituality and its relation to mental health. Because there is an overlap. There's a huge overlap. We know that. And so, we have change, great change. Prioritizing healthy and safe relationships over toxic ones, enough said. Asking for help and seeking professional services. And it's not just therapy, it could be professional services, it could be your pastor, it could be your community, it could be someone else that you think, has wisdom that you really think you would benefit from. By the way, people love to hear good news about their bad habits. Who are you going to get help from? Is that because you want to have someone support your bad habit or your bad decision? And you don't want confrontation? We have to ask ourselves that when we seek help. I think I'm seeking help because I'm going over to my best friend to talk about this issue with my husband, which, by the way, I don't do, but let's just say I did. And I go to my best friend, I'm like, oh, guess what he did? What is the purpose of that? Is it to establish more healthy relationships? Is that really asking for help? Or is that an opportunity for venting and criticizing and toxicity, right? Yeah, that's what it is. So who are you seeking help from? And how can we see our habits in a more realistic picture? We say, oh, drinking wine helps the heart? That's wonderful. I must drink wine now. Really? Because there's a lot of things that help the heart. That is not drinking wine, but those things you don't want to do more of, right? How about eating more lentils? How about we have nurses here and doctors. How about doing more of that helps the heart long term? Oh, no. I don't like lentils. Whatever. Telling your story, being vulnerable in safe spaces, there's going to be a moment where your story must be told. To be able to heal yourself or be able to support someone else in your testimony, that's the right moment. But listen, it's gotta, the stars and the moon has to align. I'm going to say this really carefully because you can't tell your story to everybody. Not everybody deserves your story. Not everybody can hold your pain well. And not everybody has the coping mechanisms to be able to listen to what you've gone through. Where we talk about vicarious trauma. So it's who am I telling this to? The moment, the tone, the space, the relationship, all of it. That's what creates safety. If you don't have safety in that moment, don't tell your story. Witnessing and recognizing victories in yourself and in others, celebrating together, and holding someone else's story is a way of all of this healing together. It's going to be a moment where you're going to be the teller, and another moment where you're going to be the receiver. And what do those safe conversations look like? When I am the receiver of a story, what do I do and what do I not do? Well, it's important for us to decrease our defensiveness. So if you are the holder of someone's story and that person is your child, for instance, or your partner or a family member or coworker where you are involved in sort of the problem there, and you're starting to feel like they're blaming you for their story, you've got to decrease the defensiveness. In that moment, it's not about you. Unless they're telling you straight out, hey, you're to blame, decrease the defensiveness so that we can listen to what's behind the story, what's the purpose of the story. Healing together is so important in healing together to be able to listen. We can't react to someone's story if we don't understand where they're coming from. So first of all, listen. Don't project feelings onto them that you hold about yourself. I'm feeling a lot less like self-worth or self-critical of my things, and I think that that's how people see me. Oh, my boss doesn't like the work that I do. Or for sure, my kids think I'm a terrible parent. Or my partner must be unfaithful. It's projection. If you have no proof of that, it's important for us to explore what's going on in the inside and the stories that we tell ourselves in order to prove or disprove those thoughts. Usually it's feelings of projection, what's going on inside. And displacement, which is I'm being treated bad, and I can't react to that person because they're a position of authority or power, and so what do? I go and treat someone else bad. Yeah, displacement. The typical story of, one parent is, criticized at work, and that parent comes home and talks bad to their partner, and that partner feels like, so overwhelmed with all these, criticism and all this negativity, and then treats the kids unwell, and then the kids treat each other unwell, and then the youngest of the bunch goes and treats the dog unwell. That's all displacement. We're all channeling the anger and the conflict and the negative emotion to who we're safer with. Because that person can't go anywhere. That's the really kind of the thought behind that. You can't go anywhere. You have to take it when I dish it. Oof. Harming our relationships. Those are not safe conversations when I just we've got to listen to what I got to say. No. We have to take a not knowing stance because we don't know. I might have gone through a car accident. Who else has gone through a car accident here? Like a life-threatening car accident, yeah. I might have gone through one too, and we could be in a support group together to manage and process those emotions, but guess what? I do not know how you feel. I do not know. I can imagine, I can suppose, I can assume. But we got to start taking that out from our language. I know exactly how you feel. Because that's like the window to let's talk about me now. I know exactly how you feel. Let me tell you about a story where it's not about you. When we're talking about safe conversations and you're the receiver, we have to minimize the voices inside of us and the anxiety of I can't help this person. This is so overwhelming. They're telling me all these things. We minimize all those things and we understand first and foremost, we don't know how they feel. We don't. We think that empathizing is joining with them. I need to know exactly how you feel. No, we don't know. And because we don't know, we go through these things. We don't assume. We ask questions. We explore. So what did you react? How did you feel? Why do you think you did that? Why do you think that happened? What could you do different? What are some solutions that you can try? What can I do to support you? Great questions. Because sometimes our questions come with a bit of judgment, yes? Like, so you didn't pray about this? Or, have you prayed about this yet? What is the message there? Your spiritual life must be super weak for you not to have that as a go-to. That's the message we give other people. Well, maybe they haven't prayed about that, but does that really mean that their spiritual life is weak? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. We don't assume their life can be super strong spiritually and still go through crisis and trauma. So we ask questions, and we ask questions from positions of curiosity rather than judgment. We manage our feelings of hopelessness and helplessness and powerlessness. This is very common in funerals. The comments in funerals that are the least helpful is, I'm going to start with the less serious ones and less controversial ones. He went to a better place. By the way, no. Nobody wants to be in the dirt or cremated. It's a confusing message. Or, at least he's no longer suffering. At least. Listen, I'm in pain. He might not be suffering, but I'm not okay. Those are really hard messages to tolerate or deal with. How do we manage our feelings of helplessness? Because sometimes those questions or those comments are made from our anxiety, because I don't want to deal with the death of another person, or I don't know what to say. We can go with, hey, I'm here. What do you need me to do? How can I best support you through this time? I had someone say this to me once, and it was impactful. I don't know what to say, but I'm so glad you told me. Brene Brown talks about it in her talks of vulnerability as well, and that's one of the things that's impacted me the most. I don't know what to say from what you've told me, but I'm so glad you did. Wow. That person really managed their helplessness and was able to sit with it well so that I can, be me, feel me. Don't fix it. Ooh, that's a big one. We think that they're telling us because they want us to fix it. And then we get angry when they don't do what we say. Well, why did you tell me then? Why did you ask me if you're not going to do what I told you to do? Or, hey, I've already given you 5 options. You've shot down every single one of them. Come back to tell me when you feel ready to do something about it. Well, guess what? Maybe they're not telling you to fix anything. Maybe they're telling you for connection. Don't take attention away from them by telling your story or giving messages, maybe like, this is a time to preach to them about certain things. It might not be the time at all. If they didn't ask for it, it's not the time. So don't take attention away from their story. Collaborate on finding solutions and next steps. Be constructive. How can we be constructive? Well, let's start out with not criticizing. We criticize from a place of power. I am doing this better than you. And so that's why I get the superiority to tell you what you're doing wrong, because I'm able to notice it because I know better. But it also, when we criticize, besides putting the other person down and entering into judgment and all these things, it's also a window into our insecurities. We criticize others feeling very insecure ourselves. If not, we would be constructive. We would be constructive. Use words that repair and heal. Take opportunities to repair in your relationships. You see someone like, you know what, I'm sorry. I lost it for a second. I didn't know what to say, and I just went off the wall. Instead of like, oh yeah, here I go. I see your vulnerability. I see that you're kind of like, showing me the jugular. I'm going to go for it. Instead of like taking the bait and saying, well, yeah, now let me tell you what you did yesterday. Take a step back and say, you know what? Yeah, both of us were really reactive in that moment. Thank you for telling me, like, you totally broke up the tension in that moment. Let's take a deep breath. Let's, go take a walk or eat some cake or something. By the way, no, don't eat as a way of coping. Anyway, use words that repair. Our language is so important. How do we witness? We walk with someone. How do you engage in witness through conversations with somebody else? Any ideas? Witness. When I am with you in a conversation, what does that mean? Yeah? Yeah, like I'm an expert, right? You're telling me because I need to tell you what to do. Yeah, you're equal. I like that. Yeah? What else? You're walking with someone. What is it like to walk with someone? What does that mean besides being equal? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, good. That you're communicating with them, that they're not alone, that you're in company with them. Very good. Well, when we're having these conversations, that can look through dialogue. We're dialoguing together through this. So the more we talk about something, the more perspective we have about it, the more it dissolves our issues, the more optimistic we feel about not doing it alone, right? Witnessing someone. Opportunity for profound professional and relational growth because I am no longer better than you. When I'm witnessing something that you're doing and I'm witnessing in conversation with you, just did that twice, then I'm also capable and willing to be transformed with you. This conversation that we're having can teach us both something, can transform us both. It's your story, but I am impacted. I'm admired by your resilience or your strength, or I'm admired by your vulnerability, or I'm changed because of your spiritual strength. Whatever it is, you're giving yourself the opportunity to be transformed with the person. And you're taking a passive participant role. You're not guiding, you're not leading, right? Marilyn, you said walking with someone. Am I not participating then? I'm just going to be silent and just listen to them? No. You're a passive participant. You might not be in charge of the story where the spotlight is on you, but you're participating how? And sometimes it takes asking the person how. How can I do this with you? If you're my partner, how can I listen to your story at this moment? And if they're telling me something that happened at work, for instance, what do you need me to do right now? How do you want me to listen to you? How do you want me to hold this story for you? And they're like, yeah, just hear me out. Okay. Or let's find a problem. Let's find a solution to this problem. Okay. That collaborative nature to it corresponds to this passive participant. And then we celebrate together, yes? Or no? No? Yes. The baby steps lead to a goal. And our goal is victory for both of us because we're transformed together. If you were willing to come alongside me in this dialogue, then you better be willing to celebrate my victories and hold me accountable. Oops, no, I don't like that part. Let's take that accountability part out and just talk to me and just, transform with me and celebrate with me. But don't hold me accountable. Don't confront me when I'm doing things wrong again. Don't come up to me and ask me, how I'm doing because I don't want to face accountability. well, you got our relationship all wrong. Because if you're asking me to come with you, I want you to be completely victorious over this, and I'm going to hold you accountable. Right? What does accountability look like in your relationships with others? Sending messages, maybe texting each other, praying for them, praying together, or asking them, hey, how's it going? Are you going to your AA meetings? Are you, not yelling as much anymore? Are you going to your therapist appointments? You collaborate to find out how you can hold that person accountable. We're responsible for changes together. Thank you for participating in this conversation with me. We took a little bit longer, Marilyn, than the time I was allotted for. I appreciate the patience, and I appreciate the space. Are there any questions that come up for you as we are talking about these different elements of healing conversations? Yeah. Church safety, okay?
I feel like sometimes, and especially in very traditional settings, people don't feel safe,
Mm-hmm.
and it creates religious trauma.
Yes.
We hear the classic, you're going through that because you don't have a good relationship with God.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You're depressed or you have anxiety or whatever. So how can we be mindful and just create more of a safe space in church? Because I feel like that's a big issue.
Mm-hmm. It's a really big issue. And I'll tell you how big of an issue it is in my perspective is when I hear kids' Bible stories and someone says something like, you don't want to disobey mommy and daddy because Jesus will cry. That's manipulation. That's not teaching a value. They're not motivated to do so out of love. They're guilt-tripped and shamed into behaving certain ways. It starts with those messages. And then the manipulation or the tactics get more sophisticated as we go on, and it sounds like those. I've heard those very often. And I've grown up in the church myself, so I've heard that very often. You haven't prayed enough, for instance, or depression is not a real thing. It's just in your head and your relationship with God, all of these things. And religious trauma can even be more severe than just the messages we receive. We could be really coerced and forced into things. And we've seen that, the traumatic, kind of darker side of our church. It's real. It's real. I think that when we engage in these conversations together, and it starts at this kind of intimate group level where we're willing to do something different, or when we hear something, we're willing to come out like to the person and say the truth with love. You know what you said, it sounded this way to me, or the way that I'm perceiving it is like this. I'm wondering if there's a different way of saying these things or doing these things. It's having those conversations, being willing to advocate, to stand up for when you hear something or see something that's not correct, and doing it probably together. That creates a lot of safety. There's a safety in numbers, but there's also safety in the same philosophy of seeing church and love and God and relationship. I think that would be a good place to start. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? Ooh, religious trauma is a huge topic. Thank you for bringing that up. Mm-hmm. The Bible is filled with stories of religious trauma. Yeah, moments where we abused our power as children of God. The transformation of the children of God that led to healing in our church. God healing coming down. I mean, it's kind of like this, talking about the things that have hurt us and then the hope that we get from restoration and healing. It's beautiful. All right, I will be around if there are any other personal questions that you wanted to ask me. I think I'll be around for another 5 or 10 minutes. But again, Marilyn, thank you so much for having me, for being able to participate in church with you today, and for the opportunity to talk about this together. May God bless you. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for the blessing of this space that our church can open its doors, that the people of church can open doors to be able to have these moments and these conversations that heal. There's a lot of healing that needs to be done inside of ourselves, in our relationships, in our churches, in our communities, and in our relationship with you. And I am grateful, Lord, that you give us hope through your steadfast love, your promises, your stories, that we can do things different, that we can heal, that we can change, and that we can move forward. Thank you so much, Lord, for that hope. Thank you for the people that surround us, that are willing to engage with us in healing. May you bless this church greatly in their process of healing. May you bless them in their families, in their marriages, and in their life goals and purposes. Thank you for allowing our paths to intersect. I leave a blessing with them. Amen.